Hello and welcome to another Nosgoth News Network with me, Basilim. As ever, we'll be covering the Legacy of Kain related news that's popped up in the last few days, and something interesting we weren't expecting this week, kind of popped out of nowhere, the return of Gex the Gecko. So a few days ago, Limited Run Games, who were perhaps best known up to this point for making physical copies of games rather than digital downloads, they specialise in making real life disc versions of games that you can hold and put on your shelf, as it were. They have held a showcase recently, and they've been branching out into other areas of gaming, and getting a few more remasters and that sort of thing under their belt. In that showcase, Limited Run presented a number of new projects that they're working on. Some of the ones that caught the eye include Castlevania Advance Collection and a remaster of the PlayStation 1 classic Tomba. And continuing the theme of returning PlayStation classics, they also announced the return of Gex the Gecko and a remastered Gex Trilogy. Gex, of course, is one of Crystal Dynamics' biggest stars and was the face of the company for a long time. The Gex engine itself went on to be used through all of the Legacy of Kain games and all of the Tomb Raider games in a modified form. In fact, it's only just hung up its boots. The Marvel's Avengers will be the last game that was using what was the former Gex engine. It's now been called, I believe it's the Foundation engine, but that has now come to an end and they'll be moving on to Unreal 5. So there's a lot of shared history in there for Legacy of Kain and Tomb Raider and the Gex community. And it's very interesting that we'll be getting a remaster of the classic Gex series. Now, another interesting wrinkle on that is who it is that owns Gex, because it shows the Square Enix logo. Now, this is something that was, again, something quite unexpected, because it was somewhat assumed that the licenses for things like Gex may have been on their way to Embracer. Now, the only licenses that were explicitly made clear, or that was spelled out in the Square Enix to Embracer sale, were Legacy of Kain, Tomb Raider, Thief, and Deus Ex. But it was assumed a lot of the others were coming along. Now, things that are Square Enix Western IPs, things like Pandemonium, Gex, Life is Strange, Just Cause, they kind of been in a bit of a limbo. We've not been 100% clear whether they're staying with Square Enix or whether they've moved to other parties. This appears to suggest that for the time being at least, those licenses are still with Square Enix. But of course there's something else to note here, and that's the presence of Limited Run Games. Limited Run Games, in case you don't know, are owned by Embracer. So here we have a project with Embracer and Square Enix working to bring together a classic Crystal Dynamics mascot. And that doesn't involve Crystal Dynamics in any capacity. Now, particularly if you're aware of the Crystal Dynamics timeline, it's just finished their 30th anniversary. And on previous anniversaries, and this one, they've typically used a logo that comprises of several of their more famous game series. Generally, these include a combination of Gex, Raziel from Soul Reaver, and Lara from Tomb Raider in different arrangements. In fact, over the years, that's generally led people every 5 years to let out the fireworks, believing that a revival is due because they've used these logos. This time, there's not been so much celebration, but it is interesting to note that for the first time since they've been using those logos, we definitely know they've been doing some sort of work on all three of those series. So we have a remaster of Gex from Limited Run Games. We know there is a reboot of Tomb Raider coming up, and various mobile things that they've been doing along there. And we definitely know they put out a massive survey for Legacy of Kain. So for the first time in years, all three of those Crystal Dynamics series have got work coming up. So it's very interesting to see what they might be doing. And of course, someone remastering Gex in that engine is very attractive. Now, it's worth pointing out that the Gex engine isn't necessarily what they'll be using. Limited run games tends to use something they call the Carbon engine, which is named after Carbon Copy. And that is an engine that at its heart is running on emulators. So it is using the original assets and the original gameplay and the original game as a base, but then it builds in advanced features on top of that and makes it more compatible with modern platforms. Now the question is, does this imply that you might get something like that for Tomb Raider and you might get something like that for Legacy of Kain? We don't know, but it will be interesting to see if this is the first wave of Crystal coming back with a vengeance. Reactions in the community have been positive to mixed, I think it might be fair to say. I must say I think I'm generally in the positive camp. I do like Gex, and I think it's always a great sign to see old PlayStation classics coming back, and especially if it demonstrates exactly what we need for the Legacy of Kain series going forward. But there have been some trepidation in certain quarters, notably. You might say there's a little bit of jealousy in the other franchises. I have seen Legacy of Kain fans that are a little upset at this, and of course there is always a contingent of Tomb Raider fans that are upset by not getting the exact remasters they want. But generally, I think this is very good news. The only concerns I have, and this is purely down to my nationality, is that he's got the wrong voice. Rainer tells me. The voice that they used in the trailer, very Bond-like trailer, but the voice they used was Dana Gould. Rainer tells me that is the original voice of Gex, but to me, it will always be Leslie Phillips and a bit of ding dong. But still, it's always a good sign to see them coming back, and that definitely gives us some positive signs for the future. Rainer has passed me off a little bit of artwork. I'll leave you with that as we finish. Until next time, Vae Victus, and look out for future content from us.